Hey guys, today I'm going to be drawing Robert Pattinson and I'm going to be talking about edges. What are edges and why are they the secret ingredient to amazing drawings? Enjoy the video. I'm going to do a bit of a tutorial today. I will walk you through the process of how I do a drawing, but I'll just spend most of the time really focusing on how to draw edges and what I mean by edges and how you can use them in your drawings. So the first stage of doing this drawing is to make an accurate sketch. I've got lots of videos about how to do accurate sketching. I'll link one above that's been quite popular. The drawing that I'm copying is one of Robert Pattinson from Dior. I really like this one because it's quite well lit. The method that I'm using today is all about dark and light, so it's really important to get a picture that has strong shadows and strong light within it in order to use this technique. There's lots of photos out there, I find, publicity shots for actors and some fragrance and modelling shots of models can often have these kind of really great lighting setups. So just spend some time browsing to find a good picture that works. The process I'm just going through to get the rough shape is I'm doing a bit of a linear block in, so I'm using lots of straight lines to kind of map Robert Pattinson's face. Now drawing pictures of celebrities is really tough because it is quite obvious when you don't get them right. And at this early stage where you're just using lines and you're not going with a lot of detail, it is a little bit tough to figure out if your drawing is accurate or not. I'm really relying quite heavily on comparative measurements and just my knowledge and experience of shapes in order to get the likeness. But again, I do have videos of breaking down the process. You can use any process that works for you to get an accurate block in. And tools like overlay, which I'll also link a video to above, are quite useful in making sure this stage is accurate. So I've split this up quite considerably. You can see I'm spending quite a lot of time noodling around on the face. I have exaggerated the tilt a little bit, which is something I always do. It's really annoying, but I keep doing it. So that just makes it a little bit tougher for me to get the likeness quite right. He's got a very distinctive face with quite unusual bone structure. So I'm really hoping I managed to nail the likeness today. So at this stage I felt like the likeness was fairly accurate. So the next step is to do a bit of a block in. So a block in is taking that line drawing that you've done and really focusing on the areas of dark and light in the drawing to posterize it into areas that are light and areas that are dark. Now, if you're struggling to do this, there's a few tools and tricks you can use. The first thing you can do is squint at the picture. So if you do that, then that really helps to kind of remove some of the noise and just focus it on the light and dark shapes. There's also apps that you can use that will posterize pictures for you. So if you have one of those on your phone, then yes, that can be quite a helpful way to help you kind of figure out how to posterize your drawing. Now, unless the lighting is very extreme, there is always an element of kind of free choice and decision. So for example, around his jaw, which area would you call the light and which area would you call the dark? There's quite a lot of midtones there around his jaw, so it's quite difficult to know which is which. I made the decision to make all of the side of his face on the right hand side in light. But you'll see once I get a bit further on in the process, I will kind of bring in some more midtones. But for now, we're posterizing it completely into black and white. So it really is a case of making a decision of when you see a midtone, is this closer to the shadow or is this closer to the light? So it's definitely, there's an element of kind of judgment involved for sure in this stage. Like for example, on his hair. So he's got like a pale bit of hair at the side part. So do we make that a light shadow or do we make part of the dark? It's really tough. So when I was drawing that block in, I really made an effort to make all of the edges very similar. So I've not used any heaviness or sharpness or any differentiation. The shadows are really almost exactly the same, or the lines are almost exactly the same going all the way around. Now this was a very conscious decision because the next stage of the process is to work on the edges. And by that I mean the edges between the dark and the light, and how sharply the light turns into dark and the dark turns into light. Now this tells you all about the form, so there's no need to shade in the whole face to give an impression of whether part of a face rounds very smoothly and softly, like his chin, or whether a part of a face rounds very sharply, like his top lip, for example. So we can tell a lot about the form just by describing the edges between the dark and the light and just focusing on that. So for an example, you can see that I'm working on his lips here. At the side of his mouth, where the edge of his mouth joins his cheek, it's a very sort of soft transition. I don't know whether it's his facial hair or just the way that the mouth turns under. It looks like more of a soft transition to me. Alternatively, on the top lip, as I mentioned, there's a very sharp line there. So actually representing those lines around the edges of those shadows can tell you a lot about the form, and you can see it in action here. Immediately, because of the way I've blended the edges in certain places and made other edges quite sharp, we're starting to get a feel for Robert's face and how it turns in the different areas, even without actually having to apply any tone to the dark area. We literally just got the only tone that we're applying is around the edges. So I'm going to speed it up a little bit now, and because this process does take quite a long time to do as I work through the whole face. Now the goal here is really to get a blend of different edges. So even in an area that looks like it's mostly sharp edges, so for example around his top lip, you still want to really look very closely to see if you can get a blend of different edge types within that range and exaggerate those edges. And the same is true for obviously areas where you have a very smooth transition, for example around his hairline at the top. It's quite a soft, smooth transition all the way around, so you're still looking for areas that are maybe just slightly more sharp and areas that are slightly more soft. Really restrain yourself for going into detail in those shadow areas. Now I had a little bit of a kind of difficult decision of what to do here. His eye socket for his left eye, which is the eye on the right hand side as we look at him, that is all in shadow pretty much, but there is a tiny little bit of a highlight on his top lid. So things like that, it's always a little bit of a tricky decision to say, do I actually bring that into my drawing or do I just leave the eye socket out altogether? So things like that you'll sometimes kind of go back and forward on when you're doing your drawing. A lot of the time it's kind of trying something out and seeing if it works, and then if it doesn't you can kind of change it, which is why I do really like pencil, because it does allow you to kind of be quite flexible and kind of experiment a little bit. So yeah, I mean, we're just going through around the whole face doing this process. Now things will move as you do this, so do keep checking in and stepping back. Obviously I filmed this all in one go, so I did struggle a little bit and I did make a few mistakes that I had to go back and fix the next day once I kind of had some fresh eyes. The other thing to do as well is just to avoid trying to spend too much time on the midtones. It's really easy to start shading bits in, like for example his bottom, like his chin and around his jaw, it's quite dark there, so it'd be very tempting to go in and start shading that in, and I did actually do that a little bit later, as you'll see in a minute. But really try and just kind of force yourself to focus on only working on the edges and really trying to leave the light and the shadow areas as undescribed as possible, and kind of 90% of the description is all going on those edges. So this is definitely a very specific exercise, and I do really enjoy it. There's artists that use this method a lot, and that's their primary way of drawing. I'll put a few in the description so you can have a look. But sometimes like playing with a cool technique like this really does make you realize that actually you quite like to do this, and it's quite an effective way of drawing, and maybe you want to do that more often. I actually use this method quite a lot when I'm in life drawing, because those are very quick poses, so I find that just by kind of spending a little bit of time on the edges, I don't have to spend a lot of time shading in drawings that are quite quick and gestural. What you'll find is after a little bit of time, you won't even need to do the blocking and then the edges. When you're doing your blocking, you can already start looking at the edges and capturing those as you draw a line. So instead of like, drawing the line of his nose and then coming in afterwards and refining it, maybe straight away you kind of do a smooth line that then kind of turns into a very sharp line. But that's kind of like maybe level 10 or whatever of 20 levels of skill. So it's kind of a step-by-step approach. And it'll be like driving. So after, initially you have to do everything separately. You spend a lot of time making a very conscious decision to do certain things, and you have to kind of make yourself do things separately and kind of very thoughtfully. But once you do it enough, you almost do it subconsciously, and that's what practicing exercises like this does, is it really kind of builds those techniques of looking at an edge and kind of just considering that when you're drawing a line as part of your drawing process, which is why this is so helpful. So it's not really looking like Robert Pattinson at the moment, I must admit, but it's looking like a cool drawing. I really do like how effective this technique is. In the next stage, I will go in and start adding in a little bit of shading, just to show you some kind of ideas of how you can take this drawing to the next stage. So yeah, you'll see kind of some ideas of how I develop this, but I did actually really like it at this stage, and I would almost be happy just to have left it at this area, because it just does look so cool, having this almost blasted out drawing where there's nothing in the shade at all. The hair is always a tricky one for me because there's so many different shades going on. I mean, do you make it all dark? Do you make it all light? Yeah, it's a little bit tricky. A bit like the eye sockets and some of the areas in the shadow where it's almost light. You don't really know what to do. Now you'll notice I left off the hands. I could have drawn these, but they're a little bit out of focus. So I felt like if it wasn't going to be the same level of description as his face, it might look a little bit jarring. If this had been a line drawing, actually I think I might have left them in because they do look pretty cool, but this is definitely a case of focusing only on the face. It does make it a little bit challenging in this case because his thumb is kind of in front of his chin a little bit, so I was kind of having to kind of figure out what I thought the chin might look like, but yeah, still good fun. So this is what it looked like at this stage. I could have quite happily stopped here, as I mentioned, but no, I carried on going. So the next stage is, and this is entirely optional, whether if you want to, you can just carry on adding some more development. So the next stage I usually like to do when I've got a drawing like this is just add in some very gentle tone to those shadow areas. I try to make the tone very uniform, so hatching is a really good way of doing this. I really like up and down hatching, but you can use diagonal hatching, whatever works. Or you can, if you've got a bit more time, you can spend a lot of time kind of building up a very even tone by using hatching in different directions and smudging and so on to develop kind of a really neutral, even tone. But I do like this kind of up and down hatching as a way of kind of introducing a little bit of uniform noise that's not too distracting from the drawing. Now, once you add in this gentle tone, that's often when you see a lot of the errors. So I'm doing a little bit of fixing on the fly here, backwards and forwards. I was very aware that the drawing wasn't quite right. There's a few areas, for example, I've kind of lifted his eyebrow a little bit up. The mouth isn't quite right. So even small tweaks like that can really throw the likeness off. So at this stage, you just spend a lot of time in general tweaking things and making them look more accurate. I have added some shade in the bottom of his chin. I felt like without having that shadow under his cheekbone, that I wasn't really giving a very good impression somehow of the person and of Robert. So yeah, I kind of gave in to temptation to add that in. I do like drawing guys because I find that things like facial hair, and they generally have a more pronounced bone structure, so it just makes it a little bit easier for me to draw them and have an accurate likeness, which is why I think I sort of tend towards drawing guys more than women. So yeah, there's kind of more details and more things to hold on to in your drawing. So here I'm really noodling on some of the details. It was that eye was really bugging me. I was like, well, I tried to add it in and then it kind of looked less like him, and I was kind of going backwards and forwards on do I add it in, but it kind of felt like it was right. So I'm gonna like super speed this up at the moment. I think it's about 10 times speed right now, which is why my hand's flying around, because some of this stage is just really slow and quite boring to watch. The drawing itself took about 1.25 hours, and this final stage was the majority of the time just getting these kind of details and tweaking it. Now sometimes if you're lucky and you kind of manage to luck out on the likeness, you don't actually need to spend a lot of time in this stage, but if there's a lot of things that aren't quite right and do need to be moved around, then this can take quite a long time. So I am using my eraser a little bit. You can use a stump as well if you like to kind of round some of the edges, or some way of smudging like a paintbrush or a bit of tissue paper. The thing to do is just not smudge too much in general. And again, just avoid or try and pull back from spending too much time or putting too much detail in the shadow. So at this stage the drawing is pretty much finished. I did go back and add a few tweaks the next day, so I'll just share that picture with you now so you can have a look. But I think this gives a really cool effect. I especially like doing this on digital, so I have got a few videos of me doing this in real time in digital medium, so on my iPad. So feel free to follow the link and go and watch that video as well if you're interested. I hope you found this video useful. Let me know how you got on if you try this technique. It is a little bit tricky, but I really love it. Have a good day everyone, and I'll speak to you all soon.